Welcome back to Gruber Motor Company. Today is Wednesday, and we have our Tesla Roadster podcast, which is primarily for our Roadster customers. But if the rest of you want to join or you're curious about Roadster issues, today is a special guest. We have Jamison Cummings joining us, who was the first Tesla technician at Tesla. He is employee number 195, and he is going to be able to answer questions. So any of you that have questions about the early days at Tesla, this is the time to ask them because we have an actual witness that was there during the formative years.
We'd love if you tell us who you are, where you're coming from when you ask your questions.
All right, I'm pulling him up now.
We have some images that will be able to pop up during the conversation of the early days. Do you know one of the things I was surprised about, Jamison, was I've got pictures of Bing Street and San Carlos, the interior of San Carlos, and San Carlos wasn't that big.
No, I don't remember how big, but I mean, it was two buildings right next to each other, and one was like more had more of a well, there was shops on both sides, but one had I mean, they managed to cram offices in both buildings, but there were definitely two different buildings, but they used the same address.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did distinctly remember like the buildings, you could tell they weren't built at the same time. They were different buildings.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, as soon as the guys get rolling here, if we can bring up the San Carlos image, I think San Carlos-2 would be the best one because it shows a bunch of roadsters inside the building. And it's fascinating what the early days were like. Is that one of the buildings that you were stationed in initially?
I think I counted at one point, I had like 7 or 8 desks.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, like the first day I started, there was an open room, and so like there was like an L-shaped desk, and they just put a computer there. You could sit here, and that was right next to the entrance to the shop that we did all the work in.
Right.
And the guy next to me was a guy named Yannick, a French dude. He ended up being the guy that built all the factories, but he was back,
Gotcha.
just sitting right next to me. So, it's one of those guys like you're always going to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Little did you know that later he like set up all the factories. He was doing it early on.
All right, I'm bringing up that picture. It might look weird for just a second.
Okay. All right. And this is the interior of San Carlos. You can see some roadsters there, and one just doesn't appreciate how small Tesla was at one point in time.
That is not San Carlos.
It is not. Okay.
No, that looks like it might be someplace in England.
Okay. All right. Well, we will correct the labels on these pictures then.
Yeah. So those lifts are red. The lifts, the lifts were blue in San Carlos, and there was only one at the time, and then we put 2 in.
Okay.
That is, I don't even recognize that shop. I wonder where that is.
Want me to try the other picture?
Yeah, let's try that one. I think it's the same building, just a different view, though. And we do have one from Hethel, UK, which is the final team that worked on VIN 2500, the Arctic White.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that car. I was at the factory when they were building that car.
Were you? Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. I just happened to be, I only went there twice. Once I went there before production, and then once I went there after, and I was like in England, so I was going to go there. I drove all the way out there, and there was the car on like a chassis, a dolly.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. There it is. It's the last car. I built the first car, and I get to see the last car.
So you mentioned one time, I think it was on social media, that you went to the Ebersbacher plant.
I find that funny because nobody wanted to have anything to do with that stuff, because Ebersbacher was, I think they were a little difficult. Maybe it was because we were difficult. Tesla was difficult. I don't know, but the relationship was a little tough, and there were some contractual weird stuff going on there. And the first control units were just kind of cobbled together. And I didn't know this, but they were known for their heaters in like tanks and the diesel heaters, which is ironic because I started installing them when I was started my business here. I've been installing SPAR heaters. And but I was really fascinated with the air conditioning system, and I was also really worried that it was going to be a real pain to work on. So when I was in England, I was just like, well, I'm in England, I might as well drive over there and meet the guy that the head engineer, and kind of check out their place and have lunch and talk with them. And I think it was more of a now that I know you, you'll answer my emails type of diplomatic visit.
Right.
And that way, if there was ever any issues, I wouldn't have to rely so much on the engineers, which they were overworked and under-resourced. I could have like another person. So, and it was all the way out towards towards Cornwall, towards that like peninsula that kind of comes off the southwest part of England. So it was a good 2.5, 3 hour drive from Metro London. But I was I was just making the rounds, learning how to drive on the wrong side of the road.
Now, yeah. Now, the parts that they were making for the Roadster, was it just the HVAC controllers for the 1.5 and 2.0 or anything else?
They might have been responsible for the PTC heater or something, but I don't recall. And they made the first one, and that thing was kind of looked like an old
It was big, yeah.
bad Star Trek show in the 60s. And then they adapt, and it was using an old I think it was a Tecumseh refrigerator pump. And then they went with the later model system and used those. I think Pete and I talked about this on the phone, that the connectors were kind of what drove the compressor, and the connectors are what drove that whole system. And they put those connectors on and Ebersbacher built that HVAC unit because of something that was like because they were sourced Ford Fusion parts.
Exactly. Yeah.
They had to use those connectors, and so we've been talking about trying to find those parts.
That is the infamous Yazaki connector, which we are still scouring the globe to attempt to find. So if anybody's listening and you have any leads on these big orange Yazaki connectors that's on the 2.0 Roadsters, if we can solve that problem, we're going to be able to fix more cars.
And I think Yazaki continued to help Tesla with their because they had the experience with HVAC cabling. They did a lot of stuff on Model S and stuff after. So it was Mitsubishi guys came in because they wanted to sell their compressor, and I was at that meeting. I was in the room when it happened.
Yeah.
And all these came in with their black, full business, and we're all there in like North Face pullovers. And one of the engineers, this guy Dan, he always wore a cowboy boots and a big belt buckle. We're all sitting there sort of casual, and these guys literally said, well, we're not making any money on this, but we're hoping that we can, win favor to, do this on Model S. So they were the first company that was like, okay, we think this is real. And that was one of the reasons why the 1.5 HVAC was left a lot to be desired, because nobody would, the part sourcing was desperate. Like Ebersbacher was the only one that could help with the controller, and the compressor was like a refrigerator pump, and it wasn't very durable. And so when we finally got some like real automotive parts, Mitsubishi was the ones that stepped forward. And if I recall, we ended up going with something else that wasn't Mitsubishi, but I think the Yazaki parts were still, these are these weird, like, you just had to be there.
Yeah, sure. Legend has it that there were some culture differences between Lotus and Tesla, and there were some rough spots. What do you think the cause of that was?
Well, yeah, I think that's a tough one. First of all, I probably don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I would guess that Lotus has been doing things for a long time. So they have their own kind of hubris on what they were doing. And then Tesla was kind of this, whirlwind, maybe kind of a hot mess, kind of coming in, changing their minds, going back and forth. Lotus being a more traditional company probably wasn't used to this level of ADD that business was run at Tesla.
Right.
So I would say from my observation standpoint, that would be a good start. Also, you got kind of a little bit more calm, professional, engaged British guys, and then sort of kind of crazy wild-eyed Americans.
The
think
guy with
that's
a
a
cowboy
possible
hat. Yeah.
characterization, but that might get me in trouble with some people. Personally, I could tell you my own anecdote where I showed up and nobody has ever turned a wrench professionally. Nobody's ever worked on cars for a living. I'm the first guy. I show
Right.
up. And so there's this sense of naivete, and I'm going, well, like, let me help. Let me give you like how the service aspect. So that was my campaign. And there was an engineer in England, and I said something to the effect, because all the mechanical engineers they were all young, kind of really bright, but not really, they hadn't really worked on cars. There was one or two guys, they were okay at it. One guy was pretty good at it. But still more engineering than mechanics. And the British guys, I think, were much more mechanical. They did a lot more stuff in comparison from what I could feel. That like a lot of the Stanford guys were all Stanford solar car guys. So that like their mechanical experience was build a solar car,
Right.
And that's not taking anything away. It's just, it's different. And so I sent an email that said, hey, it's a little bit naive on its own right. I said, engineers aren't always mechanics. So if you like want some insight, ask me questions and I'll help. And that pissed this guy off something fierce in England. And my future boss, who was not really my boss at the time, he kind of called me aside and he goes, kind of watch yourself. You kind of pissed this guy off. And this guy was one of the main, I think he was a former Lotus engineer, and he was very mechanical, and but he's working for Tesla, but he's over at the Hethel plant. So I'm like, okay, geez, God, I'm just trying to help. That's my approach. So whatever, I don't take it too personal. And I think that he started to realize, or maybe he thought, because I wasn't brandishing this, I think he started to think, well, this guy might be somebody that's big in the Tesla world, because when I showed up at Hethel the first time, he was really nice to me. And I was kind of afraid, like, is he going to be a jerk? And he was really nice. And he goes, hey, you want to drive a Lotus on the racetrack? I mean, a Tesla on the racetrack? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do that. Like, he was really ingratiating himself. And it turned out we had a great relationship after. And I think at one point he even was working for me a little bit. And so I think he saw the writing on the wall. He's like, this guy might be my boss. Or I think he was thinking that, right?
Right.
It turned out later, I didn't really care. He was cool, and he took me on the track, and it started to rain, and I got a little sketched out, and he talked me into it. And I drove VP4 actually.
Really?
On the Lotus track, and it has a really long straightaway. It was an old bomber runway, so it was pretty nerve-wracking to drive a Tesla Roadster in the rain on the track, but I did it.
Right. We hear difference.
There was a cultural difference. I think it was, to make a short story incredibly long.
Yeah,
that was a cultural difference I felt, but it was very, very nuanced, and it was very interpersonal, and it was no big deal in the long run.
very cool. In the quest for trying to get parts for Roadsters, we reached out to Lotus about a year or so ago, and it turns out that the original plant manager is still there, Matt Windle, and I spoke with him, and we were having problems sourcing the locking mechanism on the steering column. And, in the 1.5s, you can barely get the key out sometimes. So,
got one right now.
Do you? Yeah. So anyway, Matt says, oh, yeah. He says, I'll help you with that. I think we have them on the production line right now. I'll go and see what the part is. And, so he gets back to me the next day and he says, you know what? We can't help you. It turns out that was one of the items that Tesla took over and decided they were going to do themselves. And of course, I went back to Tesla at that point, and no one within Tesla currently at that time a year ago knew what the precise source of this part was. But what I found really encouraging is that Lotus was willing to help, and I sense that they really have an attachment to the Roadster. They feel that they were largely responsible for the success of that car. So that's encouraging.
I think in retrospect they are proud of it, but
Yes.
I think in the moment they were burdened by it. Like
Yeah.
it was it was mildly adversarial, and they had plenty of reasons to feel that way because we were going to build the car there and then we changed our mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we had to. And that was not a good thing for them, like, because they had to do this umbilical cord test, and they were just a little bit less flexible on those concepts than that was probably one of the bigger differences. When you're in a startup, you're sort of kind of ready to just show up and grab a broom, or you never know, right?
Right.
And that was where I think the difference was, like, and the reality was that if they built that car in Bethel, then they wouldn't have got through even the first 500.
Yeah. I don't know if you could speak to this, Jamison, but we're in a quandary right now because we've got a couple, well, at least one original Roadster with an SFZ VIN prefix. And the legend had it that the first 11 Roadsters were built 100% in Bethel, UK. But talking to Tom Greiner, for example, it turns out that may not have been the case. Can you speak to that? Do you know how many were 100% built in UK, and or any of them for that matter, or were they all gliders that came to the U.S.?
Well, my first day was the first day of VP1. VP1 showed up the first day I showed up. We started work together at Tesla. And that car did not have a battery in it. We had to put one in.
Okay.
And so I can't speak to cars, not all the cars, because some of the VP cars were cars that were in Europe for a given period of time. So they may have shipped some batteries over there. So I don't think it was a very much a on or off, but I think there was a rationale behind the SFZ being that they were more built in England, and it might have been that they had powertrain and they didn't have a battery, and then later they just everything was put in Menlo Park, and they were complete just rollers. So that might be the difference. I probably knew at one time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, the question became, were all of the SFZ cars, true Euro cars, built 100% there? And it looks like that may not be the case. I'm sure that we'll figure out what's going on. We have Founders number 3 right now, Roadster Founders 3, that is coming up for sale. And again, the question there is, was this 100% built by Lotus, or was this a glider that was shipped here? Do you remember that car, by the way? Radiant
What color
red.
is it? Is it blue?
It's radiant red.
Radiant red.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we put that car together in 1050 Bing.
At Bing Street. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I more remember. Elon Martin's car. If we may have actually put it in a Menlo Park. Actually, those cars did not show up in order.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I recall, Elon's car came, and then like Founders 4, that car I believe was a silver car that belonged to Antonio Gracias, and I think Martin's car, because of the paint and some other things, and for other reasons, was a little delayed.
Was custom. Now, Elon is Founders 1 and Martin is Founders 2. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this Founders 3.
They certainly weren't showing up in order.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially because Martin's had a very special paint job.
Sure. Hey, we do have a YouTube question for you as well. It's from Carr. He's asking, which type of acts of kindness has Jamison experienced with regards to Tesla Roadster owners?
Which types of acts of kindness?
Yes.
Patience from my customers, because it takes a long time to fix these cars. Like, and being good customers in general, like just get it done, take your time. That's pretty much an act of kindness in the automotive business.
We've seen a lot of that same thing, haven't we, Pete?
Oh, totally.
Especially some of the early fixes.
Yeah, welcome to our world. In fact, you and I were talking yesterday about the generosity of the community in donating the keys, the locking lug nut keys. And Jamison is trying to start his own library like we have that we freely share in the community. But yeah, a lot of that is the kindness of owners and parts. Oftentimes, people contact us. They somehow ended up with an extra hardtop or whatever. And, they usually will make that available to those of us out here that are trying to keep the Roadsters alive. So I'm sure you'll see more of that.
I had somebody give me a TPMS tool too. I thought that was nice, but turned out it didn't work. But I was very generous of them. I tried to give them money, so there was a couple acts of kindness.
Yep, there you go.
Very cool.
So,
Freightliner, because Freightliner used that system too.
Oh, okay.
Pick up the wheel speed sensors. It also allowed you to add like 5 or 6 axles.
Right. So you had mentioned in our first podcast that there was also a learning curve for the people that worked at Tesla when you came in, because you were the first mechanic, really, and the rest of them were technicians and engineers. But tell us the toolbox story. I thought that was quite hilarious.
Well, I had a big toolbox, and it was kind of a joke that was the other employee that day that got hired. And so, because my toolbox was like, I send you a picture. It was like 7 feet tall and 8 feet long, and it was fire engine red. It wasn't like the orange red that Snap-on uses. It was like a really vibrant red. It was a Matco toolbox. Had a stainless steel countertop. It was this giant thing, and some of the mechanical engineers were just like, it was like the monolith for them. They're like, "Oh my gosh, look at this thing!" And it was funny because I met somebody in the hallway, a guy that turned out to be a pretty heavy contributor to Model S and Roadster battery, mechanical engineer, and he goes, "Oh, you're the guy with the toolbox." So it was like it wasn't even like, "Oh, you're the first mechanic or the first service guy. You're the guy with the toolbox." So there was that, and then there was the other funny thing where some of them still thought it was okay to go with my toolbox and take tools out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "You definitely don't know what you're doing. Like, what are you doing? I just need a pair of pliers." Not from there. So different, because you go to a shop and Snap-on will literally give you a sticker that you put on your toolbox that says, "Don't ask to borrow my tools," or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't have that culture.
Mm-hmm. So you were really one of the first ones to introduce that culture. Did they have any service centers at the time you came in?
No, they had one lift, and they had there was 2 cars there. There was EP2, which was a yellow car. That had like a Lotus brake system. It was a total in between something, just a total prototype car. And then EP5, which was a red car that was a marketing car, that was the one that was like on TV early on in 2007. I think it was on national TV at like Good Morning America or something. We had to get that car ready. That was the main marketing car. And then everything else was out getting beat up and stretched out and banged around and testing and crashing and stuff like that. And then VP1 showed up. So there was only a couple cars, and Mule 1 was there.
Okay. So what year are we talking about now? Is this like 2007? Okay.
Early 2007.
Early. Okay. Looks like we have another question coming in from YouTube.
Yes, this one's from Joel. It's more of a comment. Would it be nice to see Tesla make a vehicle design similar to the latest Lotus?
I think they may be referring to the Avija. Are you familiar with that, Jamison? It's that Lotus with the holes in the sides. It's 100% EV.
Oh no, I haven't seen that.
Oh,
but it's based off of this construction design that Lotus uses, the chassis tub, and
yes.
I haven't seen that one.
And it looks like another YouTube question. Joey's cleaning lady, who joins us often on these podcasts, she says, what is the story about that carbon fiber roadster that you guys sold? Well, first of all, we didn't sell it. It belonged to Yoast. And we were trying.
That's a very good question for us,
Yeah, it is.
isn't it?
And
Joey's cleaning lady. Bravo. That was a good one. I mean, the acts of kindness question was good. Don't get me wrong. It just threw me for a loop.
yeah.
But this one we can really talk to, right? Because now that's how I met you. I went down there and got that car.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah,
I
bought that.
And it was another one of those sad stories where a roadster goes to a shop somewhere or a consignment shop or whatever, and they don't understand. Yeah, a body shop in this case, to fix the yellowing, to fix the clear coat, right? And it happens. No one intends to do this, but they forget to charge the car and they brick it. So here they brick this R80, first generation R80 pack. And by the way, those are very difficult to repair. So it comes to us for a recovery. And try as we may, it just would not cooperate. The first generation legacy packs, we recover those all day long. They're fairly simple. They're predictable. You can get log files. You can pinpoint exactly where the problem is and then put it on life support until it goes in for surgery, where we drop the pack. This one just would not go that route. So we put it in for a pack replacement. And it sat in our shop, 2 years or something like that? Yeah. Nothing was happening. It just wasn't budging. So finally, Yoast said, all right, let's let Jamison and Carl have a try at this. And that's when you came down and picked up the car.
Yeah. I bought the car. Carl and I are going to revive it. And we want to, we're going to get it perfect. It has every special part that Tesla ever made on it. So and the bodywork on it's worth more than a Tesla Roadster. The bodywork's worth 140 grand.
Really?
So
wow.
We want it to be in a museum somewhere. But getting a 3.0 pack was challenging too.
Did you guys get one finally?
So it took a little bit longer than we thought. And to be honest with you, if I had known if I knew then what I knew now, you'd still have the car because it was. I thought it had a 2.0 pack in it, and when it had 3.0 BMS firmware, we couldn't reverse it. So
gotcha. So does it have a pack yet, or are you guys still waiting for one?
We're trying to get one.
Okay.
So that's probably been the longest pole in the tent, and it's sitting safe and sound up at Carl's shop. So I picked it up from you, and then I went down to Fisker where Yoast had a bunch of parts from because he used to work there. And then I went up to that body shop, and of course they were like, it wasn't me, we didn't do anything, right? I wasn't going to sit there and, but he had some other parts, and it's missing the hood latches. Remember the hood latch story? Like,
yes, yeah.
His body man goes, no, they didn't have hood latches. And then, you showed the picture with no hood latches, and I sent it to him. So, and those latches are not available.
Yeah.
Those are rare to get because they come off of an old 90s Ford compact.
Yeah, we found some new ones, by the way. They're on our e-store, so if you need some, we've got some supply right now.
We acquired a couple of them, but thank you.
Did you?
So yeah, it's we're actually, I think, getting it up and running. I may go up there sometime soon to do some of the work, and we're gonna finish wrapping the bumpers because they were still plastic in a matching carbon fiber, and we're going to get it running, and then we want it to go to a collector or something, because it's a special car. I mean, the Yoast was my boss at the Tesla service. He was the only VP of service up until that point. Everybody else was kind of like a sales and marketing VP. We're always kind of run by somebody that didn't really know anything, and Yoast was really good at what he did. From my perspective, he was a really good boss to work for. And he was commissioned by George Blankenship, the guy who started the Tesla store, to come up with some, different things to make service more profitable. This was at a time when we were told to make service profitable, which changed. And so Yoast came up with a whole series of aftermarket Tesla-based performance parts that we called. Nobody really knows about this, but it was called the Roadster RR project. And that car has all those parts. So it's like a Skunk Works car. And after I made some calls, there are individual parts in various different cars of 2 or 3. Like the brakes in that car are in 2 other cars. It has a lower final drive and a specially tuned limited slip by an Australian company. I got all the specs on everything, and it has a specially tuned suspension that just doesn't exist, and the bodywork. So it's the most customized, unique Tesla Roadster that isn't like massively altered or something.
Right.
From a kit that they were going to sell, they never did. So it has a lot of there won't be another car like that.
A lot of history in that
Right.
car. Yeah. It was one of our favorite cars because we give tours daily at the shop. And that was a car that everyone gravitated toward. That and a T0, of course. But that carbon fiber presentation on that car, it was like something that the Roadster owners have never seen before.
It's a stunner. I mean, it really does belong in a car museum.
Yeah. Did you guys ever find the
give all the documentation, all of the documentation for all of that stuff? I have it all, and I was one of the signing signatures for approving the stuff. And in fact, that car has special software in the brakes so that those brakes will work. And I was the one that tested and approved it in Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in the middle of winter. So
Interesting.
I have a significant, and Carl as well did all the body work, and I think he did a lot of the mechanical work. So it'll be a good, we'll make a notarized, certificate of authenticity, but it'll be legit, right?
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Yeah. Oh, wait. You know what? I forgot. I needed to.
Yes. Thank you.
There you go.
To be included in this conversation.
Yeah. So we have a LinkedIn question for you from Simon Whittock. He says, I remember Jamison interviewing me for the first UK Tesla tech outside Lotus, walking to his hotel in London back in 2009. Roadster days were my best times at Tesla.
Wow. Simon. Wow, that's cool. Hey, Simon, how's it going? Gosh, that's, it's really, there was a lot of, the UK team, service guys and the field service engineers were some of my favorite, just the hardiest, most tenacious guys, because they didn't have the local support that the US guys had, and they kind of had to figure it out, and they were badass. And I was fortunate enough at one point when they were being managed by the UK European head of service. He resigned, and I got these guys. They became under my umbrella. So the first thing I did was I went to HR and I found out how much they got paid, and then I went straight over there and did a review and made sure they all got a raise. And that was how I think they already liked me anyways, but I wanted to make sure that they really appreciated me. Yeah. So
sure.
And they deserved it. I mean, they were so fantastic, and I just loved working with those guys. All great dudes.
Outstanding. So all in all, how long were you in the UK roughly?
Well, I've been there several times. So, I mean, I would spend 1 to 2 weeks there. Mm-hmm. Not too long, I wanted to get home to my family. But the first time I went there, I was there for 2 weeks in the summertime when the weather's nice.
Yeah. Yep. So at some point, service started. The cars were starting to get released and all that. How involved were you in the creation of their service delivery system?
Oh, I mean, the service delivery system, that wasn't a system that was made until I made it.
Okay.
It's funny. There are so many people that use that system, but nobody knows where it came from. And it's kind of lame because I was like, hey, I was the one that made that. Do I get any credit for it? But what happened was in Model S, they were building cars every day, and they were all flawed. They all had production flaws. So they had to be rectified. So we were sending these emails, like we were like kind of throwing it over the fence. and some cars would get kicked back, and they would rework them, and Fremont or service would work them. And so we basically had to keep track of, VIN XYZ has these issues, and it was in the format of an email. And my boss Yost was doing those emails. Then he went on vacation, and so he said, "You need to do these emails." And so I was doing these emails, and he goes, "You didn't do it right." And I'm like, "What's right? There was no right way." And I had this very high energy engineer that worked for me in the field service team, who had created the technical support database using QuickBase.
Right.
And so
Wow.
he had turned it into our technical support hotline. What it gave us, where you had to fill things out, and it was mineable. It would track stuff, so that it wasn't just chaos. And so I told him, we got to come up with a system that tracks these cars when they roll off the line. And we realized that it was a much bigger animal to get it from the end of called the manufacturing execution system. They called it MES, and to the end of giving it to the customer. And so we created a system using his pedantic ability to create these databases, where anybody could look at a VIN, which is a normal car company would you do this, and find out where it was in the sort of pipeline going to the customer. Was it on a truck? Was it at a store? Was it at service? Did it have outstanding issues? And so we had to get the MES outputs and then build our own pipeline. And he named it, I think this guy, Dave, his name was David. I think we named it Passport. I think he gave it that name. So the system was called Passport, which was great because it wasn't an acronym. And we all know that Elon famously hates acronyms.
Right.
So, and it was funny because years later, I met some guy who was a big director there. I'm like, "Oh yeah, do you ever use Passport?" He goes, "Yeah." Well, yeah, I built that. Like, you live in the house that I furnished. It was kind of funny, but somebody had to create it, and I created a lot of things because the way they were doing it, nobody was doing it, and it was just a burden, like sending an email. So let's make a system, and so we built it. The kid was really good at this, and he just cracked it out. And I don't remember, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, something fast.
Wow.
So this current vehicle that we're selling for a client, there are actually a pair of them. There's Founders 3 Roadster and Founders 3 Model S. And what was astonishing to us was the Model S has panel gap issues all around the car. And apparently the owner of this vehicle went to Tesla and said, "Look, can we fix this?" He said, "Well, we really don't have our production methods dialed in well yet." Can you confirm that?
Absolutely, I can confirm that.
Okay.
It was yeah, I don't know. Might not want to tell that story, but there was the tooling was built wrong. It wasn't built by an aluminum panel tooling expert. Their expertise was in steel because
Right.
one of the VPs was associated with a company that never built aluminum cars.
Okay.
And somebody can forensically go through what I say and figure out these people, but I'm not going to call them out. And I knew this later because I had a very close relationship with an engineer who told me what happened. And they stamped all those aluminum panels, and they didn't have the right pre-curvature for aluminum, which snaps back, springs back in a different rate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody knows this stuff.
Right.
And so they made all those dies. I mean, we're talking lots of money. And so the gap and flush issues, and there may be more because I wasn't a body engineer. This is just one anecdote.
Yeah.
This isn't this is the problem with information. It's not binary. It's not the be all end all. This is just a contributing factor. And so a lot of the panels didn't have the right. That's why the hoods on a lot of Model S's were proud. They pointed up.
Yeah.
This is a huge piece of metal, and it sprung back.
Right.
And so they fought that for a while, and eventually they got it right.
Yeah. Well, all is not lost here because this customer asked us, or we spoke about the potential for repairing this, and I think he made the right call. He says, "No, leave it. This is an artifact that makes this car rare and collectible. It's the third one. It's the third Founders series, and we need to be able to preserve history." And
Yeah.
so when you look at this car, you look at the gaps in the panels and the things that you described, like the hood sits a little bit high, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's the spring back in the aluminum that was the problem.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, but I mean, it happened.
Yeah.
I know that it happened. I can't say, and like I said, I can't say that it was the only reason why those things happened, but it's almost like the valuable stamp where the airplane was upside down.
Right.
Yeah.
Why would you fix that? Not that you could fix that, but it's like, you're right. I didn't even think about it that way, but it's almost like it's Founders 3. Why would you, it's just like part of the nature of the flaws. You wouldn't do that to an old Bugatti that had some sort of manufacturing flaw. You wouldn't fix it, right?
Right. The Roadster has the same issue, of course. In the hood vein, there's some carbon fiber dimpling that is coming through the paint. Same problem.
Yeah, especially on the underside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually on the top side as well.
Okay, yeah. You know
Yeah.
what that was from, right? Those were bad molds from the first. If they were early cars, they were air bubbles from the molds.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, it's, I mean, these cars are being sold with those imperfections clearly detailed. And it's on our website, by the way, we have it under Roadster Matchmaking right now, but we're going to expand that to some of the other Tesla vehicles. So if anybody wants to see that, there's a video and some of those pictures. All right, Jameson, looks like we've got some more questions here. Joey's cleaning lady is giving us, oh, okay, this is the question. There were some numbers there. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Does anyone have a spreadsheet of the rarest colors and interior combos for the Tesla Roadster?
Do you?
I'm thinking we have the census program out on our website. And if you want to see how many colors there were, you can search on that. You can type in, insane green, and you'll see where they are and how many there were. That's probably the closest thing to giving or providing the information that they're asking for.
It's probably it lived somewhere in Tesla once, and it was probably in a Salesforce program.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still use Salesforce. I think they probably scuttled it back in 13, 14 in exchange for their own system. And it was probably in something in Salesforce.
So you traveled a bit too as a ranger, repairing, the deep dive type problems. Do you have any great stories about where they sent you to fix a Roadster problem and how you resolved it?
Oh yeah, well that my best ranger story was that I went to Dubai. That was I was not as much of a ranger. I didn't do that much because by then I was kind of like, I built out their toolkit and I made sure that they had all their processes in place, and somebody else went and did the ranger work. But they did send me to Dubai, me and a colleague who was the head field service guy in Germany. And he was an Aussie actually. And we went there to rescue a couple of Roadsters that were having problems with. They were 1.5 cars, and they had the PEMs were overheating and they were power limiting. Mm-hmm. And so we put special hot PEMs in them, which I totally hated. I think I told this story before. And I didn't like having specially tuned parts because you can't track that, right?
Right.
So I was always resistant to that, to the point where as long as it didn't get me in trouble, I wasn't going to say no to Elon, doing that. But if that car lives in the ether somewhere and nobody knows that it has special parts in it, I mean, how do you even fix it, right? Because the new parts you're going to have aren't going to be the special parts. So we tried to avoid that. And that was a very logical thing this is the difference between like what the engineering guys want to do and what the service guys want to do. This is where the kind of diverge is. Engineering guys want to figure out how to fix it. The service guys want to have the fix, but they want to make sure that it has the ability to live in perpetuity, right? Mm-hmm. And if you just can't track, like, what are you going to do? Keep a special hot PEM on the shelf for next time the 3 hot PEMs go bad? So, but this case was very special because these people were future investors in Tesla. So I kind of got it, with that. So I was like, yeah, we got to do whatever we got to do to get these cars running. Mm-hmm. And we put these special PEMs in their cars and then drove them all over. It was actually Abu Dhabi. We went to Dubai to fix one car, and then we went to Abu Dhabi to fix these cars that belong to a sheikh. And there was a couple other cars they couldn't figure out, like, hey, my car has no power. I'm charging it outside in 114-degree weather. And it's like, well, your battery is 114 degrees. It's not charging because it's sitting there just trying to cool. And then you get in and the battery's heat soaked. Why don't you put it in that air-conditioned garage next to your your Porsche and your Ferrari?
Bentley, yeah.
Charge it in there. There was a couple of things we did like that. But we did put those hot PEMs in those cars and then tested them and drove them all over Abu Dhabi, and people just were like, what the heck? What is that? You know, it was pretty fun. I got some good video of it.
Did you? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Do we have a question up there? No, that was the rarest combo. How present was Elon during your tenure there? Did he walk around the floor and, give advice, or what was it like?
He was definitely there a few days a week. In the early days, he wasn't there that much.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in fact, I don't remember, a few weeks or maybe in a couple months elapsed. I kept hearing Elon's name. I had no idea what he looked like because he didn't search things up 2007 so much. I think I remember the first time he showed up, and I was like, he had an entourage because everybody's following him around, and it was in the Bing shop. And so, you know, it's interesting. Since we last talked and I started working on Roadsters again, I went through all the books. I went through Ashley Vance's book. I went through Ed Niedermeyer's book, and I went through Tim Higgins' book. So you familiar with these books?
No, I'm not.
So there's the Power Play. There's one called Ludicrous. And then there's Ashley Vance's book, which was more of an Elon Musk biography. And I found them really fascinating. And I found them pretty much to be really accurate,
Yeah.
impressively. I was almost like, how the heck does that guy know that? And in fact, some of the things they told me connected the dots for me. And like, they were explaining things back in 2007. Then I was like, well, that's why it was like that, you know? And at the time, Elon Musk was not as engaged because Martin was doing things, but they were in a disagreement in the back channels. So I was listening to stories that I probably wasn't paying attention to because I was busy working, but then hearing it and going back and going, okay, yeah, right. Of course, it was that way. So Elon Bing Street wasn't there too much until we mostly moved to Circle Star. Have you heard of that office?
Mm-mm.
So Bing Street was the first place, and then we moved all of our office stuff to Circle Star because the company was getting bigger, and they'd have like board meetings there, and you know, we do job interviews there. That's where I, you know, interviewed Carl for the after. That's an interesting story because I had known him previously and then re-met him again. And but they still maintained the shop, and the shop space got a little bit bigger down in Bing Street, and then also to a different shop in Washington. So as they expanded, and I was at Circle Star more in doing a lot more administrative work, I would certainly see Elon, and he would literally sit right in the Elon liked these things. He didn't like cubicles. He had things called pods, which were groups of desks put together.
Right.
And so he would always sit in the pod right next to us when he'd show up. And so he was there all the time. And that was more 2008, 2009. But in the beginning, it was more Martin. So I was kind of there during that transition to, you know, and it was more like water cooler talk. So reading the books later, and there's more like, and also kind of probably reminding me, I probably forgot a lot about it. And so it was interesting to hear, like, there was a conversation, I think, in one of the books, it was talking about how Martin's leadership was waning because he wasn't really a natural leader. He was more of an electrical engineer. You know, I'm not trying to disparage the guy. I always want to say this. People take words out of context and stuff. But he did a thing where he had an inspirational meeting where he talked about no smoke. My daughter's never going to be able to see snow on Mount Kilimanjaro. was like an uplifting and motivating speech. And I remember being there for that speech.
Uh-huh.
And it was funny to hear it in a book. And it was a very specific speech where he tried to rally the troops. And it was the only time he ever did it. And I was like, that's why I was impressed about the accuracy of the book, because all those narratives were true.
Fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good read. I think I'm going to jot that down and pick up those books.
Tim Higgins' book, he's a Wall Street Journal journalist, and I actually would love to meet him and say, you did a great job. I mean, there obviously, after I left in 2013, I can only assume that based on the accuracy of what he did in the previous stuff, that he didn't stray too far from the path after.
Sure. Sure. On YouTube, Joy's cleaning lady has a follow-up question for you. She says, so the 3.0 PEMs nowadays are new PEMs without badging. Can anyone confirm?
You've probably seen more than me, Pete.
I can, yes. There is no such thing as a new PEM, by the way. They stopped making them in 2008. Chroma in Taiwan, that was the end of that run. We tried to get them to remake them, but to start that production line was going to be $2 to $3 million, and nobody out here in the independent space has that kind of capital to fund that. There's just no ROI for that.
Right.
What we do find is that when they do a 3.0 upgrade, they typically change the PEC board because they have to change some resistors on that in order to accommodate the new cells that have a different charge characteristics. We have seen PEMs, however, that look like they're brand new. They are missing the escutcheon or the aluminum plate that says either Tesla Roadster or Tesla Sport Roadster. And when we open those PEMs, we find that they are new out of stock. The problem with that is they aren't upgraded. They do not have the filter caps changed, which are 15 years old now. They do not have the insulating material replaced. And these are the types of components that are going to age whether the car is being driven or not.
Right.
So they are not brand new PEMs, but they must have found some inventory. And when it's convenient, it looks like they're simply swapping out the PEM versus changing just the PEC board in the PEM. That's usually what we see.
Interesting.
Pete, just so you know, we are at 55 minutes.
55 minutes. Okay. All right.
Selfie here. Come on. There we go. Gotta have my own records.
Yeah. So other questions that we had here is, now that you're on your own repairing Roadsters, congratulations, by the way, we need more people doing this type of work. As we all know, the Tesla service centers are beginning to regionalize. They're no longer allowing all of the service centers to work on Roadsters. So we need some offset to that, and having, someone like you join the ranks is very, very welcome.
Thank you.
I found it funny the other day when you were saying, when I was working on these things, we had a parts room that I could walk into. How has that changed for you now that you're working on Roadsters?
Well, I mean, it's brutal. There are no parts. Every last plastic clip is, kind of could be useful. So I don't even throw away the stuff that's bad just in case I could use it.
Right.
Like I'm working on Founders VIN 2, and I think some of those parts were literally 3D printed because they're so brittle.
Yeah.
The speaker bezels and stuff like that are just cracking. I did an audio system upgrade on this car, and it's very, very fragile. And so there's a couple of things you can get from Lotus, but even like I had a cabin light, I pulled it out and the clips broke off. I mean, there's just no way to fix it. And I had to get a Lotus one that was totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent an hour grinding it to fit.
Right.
So it's pretty painful. And, it was an LED upgrade. So I had to modify the connectors. And sometimes I wish I just did brakes and mufflers on Hondas and Toyotas, because you can just buy the parts down the street and put them on, and you don't sit there and wait for weeks. And the repair paths are very, very challenging. And I don't have the benefit of, like, you have been able to source from the suppliers, and so obviously you're going to be a source for me. And then Carl has been also doing his sourcing, and he's got his collection of parts. So there are a couple of resources out there, but I have a PEM that has probably had some isolation resistance faults because of the really bad rain that we had here.
Mhm.
And we're not putting a new PEM in it. It was an insurance job. I had to tell the insurance company, like, it's going to cost you money whether I fix this or not, just to look at it. And
Right.
don't cringe, because you can't buy these parts anymore, so you can't put a price on it.
Yeah.
And I charge them very fairly, but it's not cheap. I mean, and that's just the challenge, is the timelines for sourcing parts, the work for finding parts is not something I bill customers for. It's not easy. It's a different set of challenges from what I was doing before. It's hard. I mean, one of the things was, like, I was talking to you about the mud flaps, right? The mud flaps,
Yeah.
you should put new mud flaps on, right? Well, you don't have new mud flaps now, and they're all they weren't very well designed. So you have to figure out what's the tape and how do you make it stick? I mean, that's a learning curve that you just didn't have to deal with when they were new, because you just put new mud flaps on, right?
Right.
Like that.
Max Jamison from YouTube has a question about these parts too. He says he's viewing from Western Australia first. So good morning, Max. What happened to the 93% of the parts that were not used from the original donor Lotus that was used to make the Roadster?
What happened to the 93% of the parts that were not used?
From the original donor Lotus. I don't know what Max is referring to there.
I'm not clear on that question either.
Yeah.
It makes it sound like they take a Lotus and they took the parts off of it, but that's not how it worked. There was a percentage of parts that were Lotus, there were a percentage of parts that were modified Lotus, and there were a percentage of parts that were custom Tesla, bespoke to Tesla. That was the majority of the parts anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking the percentage of parts that Lotus provided was quite a bit lower than 93%, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a number. It was like single digits, I mean, it really depends on, are you talking about line items on a bill of materials? When you looked at it that way, the percentage of parts was fairly small, like didn't you say that the Tesla took the ignition locks? They didn't use Lotus ones?
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that sucks, because I thought I have a 1.5 with a really sticky ignition barrel, a fairly new car.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tried everything to lube that thing, and
Right.
that means that it's not really an available part for us to find. And I know who made that part, by the way.
Oh, really?
Minda made that part. They make the top as well.
Mm-hmm.
They were an Indian supplier, and I do know for a fact that they would basically do the whole production run for Tesla in one day.
Okay.
They just tooled up and they scheduled one day and they built them all.
Max
It wasn't
is-
like, and then I don't think they kept any. They just shipped them all to Tesla.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Now, Max has come back with a clarification. He's saying legend says that 7% of the original parts from the Lotus Elise were used in the final product. And so he's wondering what might have ever happened to those other 93% that weren't used in the final product.
Well, those are, yeah.
So that number sounds legit.
Yeah.
That 7% is those parts that I was talking about. So the other 93% parts, as I re-explained, is that there was the parts that were modified Lotus parts,
Mm-hmm.
and then there were the parts that were Tesla parts. So those parts are basically all Tesla parts, and you can't source them from Lotus.
Yep.
And so, whatever's on the shelf is what's left, or it's a used part. So I mean, and it's possible. I hate to say it, they may have thrown away a lot of stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, getting back the parts, we're still trying to solve this one. I've been working on this one for 2 years, Jamison. The mats and the Roadsters, for the most part, they're good. As soon as a car comes into our shop, we take it out back, we pressure wash and clean them. We make the white Tesla lettering look white again. It's just something we offer. But there are times when these things are ripped up, or the heel has dug into the. So
Yeah.
we finally found the vendor that made those originally. we sent them samples of the mat. They already had some drawings of the sizing and all of that. And we were at a point where they were going to start producing these as a recreation, basically. And then we ran into a problem in that there's a Tesla lettering that's embroidered in that mat, and we needed to get Tesla's approval. And I've been working on that now for about 9 months. Still can't get anybody within Tesla to pull the trigger and say, yeah, let these guys have some mats. You know, the original Roadster owners need mats. So what if there's a Tesla lettering and it looks like our, brand? I mean, those are the types of challenges that we run to, on a daily basis almost.
If you could get Elon Musk's attention for about 3 nanoseconds and he pen stroked that, it would be solved.
And
like
I have
Yeah.
done that before, but trying to reach him these days has become extremely difficult. He's been incognito
impossible.
for about a year. Yeah.
You're more likely to get a hold of Joe Biden at this point, or
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be tough. And even if you do, because Elon would probably be more interested in talking to you than Joe Biden. I mean, just saying, because you're a Tesla guy. And but try to get him to say, hey, could you approve this list of things? We have these things we need you to do.
Yeah.
Once again, the guy's
He's
doing
busy.
the job of 100 people. So
Yeah.
Right.
it would
YouTube.
have to be a moment where he's intent on doing it, and then it would happen like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got YouTube. Car is coming back. He says, how much of the Tesla was fiberglass versus carbon fiber? Do you know that?
There's no fiberglass that I can think of in a Tesla Roadster. There's glass-filled plastic, like the later model hood frames,
Mm-hmm.
and there's polyurethane bumpers, but there wasn't any fiberglass. It was all the panels were carbon fiber.
We're CF. Okay. All right. And then YouTube, Invincible Eclipse asks, any updates on the 3.0 Roadster that was sent to the Tesla Service Center in Tempe? Any more 3.0 batteries with impedance issues? This was something that we had been working on, and we were waiting for final confirmation from Tesla that there is a problem with the 2016 released battery packs. And Invincible Eclipse, we don't have any final read on that yet, but I was planning on reaching out to both of the customers because there are 2 of these Roadsters that were exhibiting these issues at the Tempe Service Center currently. Are you familiar with that, Jamison? It was the loss of power in the 2016 replacement packs. You would be driving the car.
I mean, I know that there was a lot of problems with the earlier packs, and one of my former colleagues, who was the first battery tech, explained to me that there was a failure in the cells that was causing them to. He explained it quite briefly, but he went back to work at Tesla. He's working there now, and he told me that it was a failed cell or something that caused the issue. Didn't give me a lot of detail, but that doesn't mean that that's what their problem is. I mean, this stuff there's always a complex story. It's not a meme amount of information. It's probably a book.
Yeah. So as soon as we find something out, we will let the Roadster owners know. So far, we don't have any final confirmation from Tesla as to what our findings were. So, Jamison, tell us a little bit about what kind of work you're doing now and where and all of that.
Well, I started my own shop a couple years ago because I have a passion for overlanding and trucks and stuff like that, and was building out my own project as a showcase, and that's a big project. I'm still working on it, and but I definitely had to transition more, less on. I mean, there's just only so much of me, and I'm about kind of 70% done with the project. I was building a custom 4x4 van with. It's going to have Tesla modules power the coach instead of like the traditional Renogy systems and there's some other brands out there. The Tesla batteries are like 4 times more dense. And I have a couple of brand new P100 modules that I'm going to use. And So I really like, I was still looking at the angle of doing everything in the vehicle was very innovative. It has an air suspension. It was very, very, and I built the engine out, did a bunch of things that there was a Ford E-Series van. There was never a 4x4 version. I built my own 4-wheel drive system. So I was doing all this custom stuff, and I sort of kind of had to kind of get into the more income phase of owning a shop as opposed to the project building phase. And so I was working on a lot of trucks and stuff like that and doing lift kits and stuff, but it's kind of hard because it's an established business and, you know, you got to build your name up. So I still really enjoy that. But actually, I kind of, Carl showed up one day and he was checking out what I was doing. And he's like, you know, I mean, there's lots of Tesla Roadster work out there. So, you know, you can probably supplement yourself doing that. And he wasn't wrong. It was definitely, there's still somewhat of a learning curve on like realizing that some of the tooling, you know, had to get up to speed with, because none of it's available. TPMS tool being one of them. So now my first company was called Maverick XV, which stood for Expedition Vehicles because E was taken for EV. And so I rebranded myself another business called Maverick EV. So I have maverickxv.com and then I have maverickev.com. And so I'm mostly doing Tesla Roadsters for now. But you know, the way the world is changing, it's probably a pretty strong business vertical to stick with it. And I mean, I do have this kind of vision of seeing Rivians and Cybertrucks one day and doing some stuff there. So, you know, I'm kind of going where the wind takes me at this point, but you know, there is a need. The Tesla Roadster customers are certainly neglected, and I definitely didn't have to sell myself on that.
Right.
You know, I had a guy call me one time. He wanted to put a lift kit on a brand new Bronco, right? And he goes, "Well, show me your gallery. What have you done?" And I'm like, I told him, I said, putting a lift kit on a Bronco is like assembling a piece of IKEA furniture. I mean, there's nothing to it.
Right.
Really. You know, and I'm like, look, dude, I work on Tesla Roadsters. Like, do you want me to explain that? You know, and he's like, okay, I get it. But I don't have to sell myself on the Tesla Roadster thing, because I was, you know, one of the first guys brave enough to do it in the first place. So I was disconnected from everything Tesla for a long time because I sort of put it behind me and moved on. And you know, around the time that we met last summer, I was kind of getting back into it, considering the business itself. And I mean, I just kind of went back and started calling all my friends and saying, sorry, it's been a long time, and I went back and listened to all the books and just kind of got myself back into the mode of embracing the ecosystem of Tesla. And so now I'm working on mostly Tesla Roadsters and Model S. I'll do some Model S stuff, and eventually I have a fairly small shop. I think space is my biggest problem. But eventually you have a really big, beautiful shop. Carl has a really great space too. And that's kind of the space you need to work on these cars. Because as you know, you can't just put it up in the air and say, I'll be done at 5.
Yeah.
I'm back, you know.
And I just went to AutoZone to get the part, and I'll have it in by, you know, the morning. Yeah, that doesn't work that way.
You don't even go to AutoZone. You call them and they bring it to you. You know, I mean, like,
yeah, that's true.
I jokingly went to AutoZone and said, what do you sell for a Tesla Roadster?
Yeah.
And they go, we can get you TPMS sensors.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. All right. Well, we've got one. Where's your shop located, by the way?
It's in Hayward, California, which is in the Bay Area, which is good for a lot of people because this is the largest, you know, kind of collection of Tesla Roadsters. You know, so I'm not doing, you know, full restorations like you and Carl are doing. But, you know, I believe in collaboration. I think I told you that before, that collaboration makes everything stronger. So, you know, I think that we can all work together and help people if they want to be helped.
I fully agree. Yeah. You know, as always, we appreciate having you on. There's one final question coming in. 3.0 packs are great from Car YouTube. He says 35K though. Well, it's a little lower than that here in the US. He says, what's a good 12-volt battery for the Roadster? They seem to go bad. Go to our e-store. We sell an electronic version. It's a 12 amp hour versus a 8 amp hour, which is the normal motorcycle battery in the 2.0 Roadsters. Jamison, as always, it's been a pleasure. I hope our audience enjoyed it.
I hope so. And thanks for joining us, Jamison. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It was nice to meet you as well. Appreciate everybody's time. I hope my stories were interesting.
They were.
definitely
Yes,
were.
indeed. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Then we have our EV podcast tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And for those of you that want to join, 10 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. We'll have TikTok live at that point as well. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow where we cover the broader EV issues. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner, and good night.